Dr. William Lindsay worked for DuPont of America, America's most prestigious chemical conglomerate. He went to Auschwitz and many other camps, virtually all of them, photographing them and examining them, and also going through the archives in Germany, especially looking at trial transcripts of those who were tried for using the compound Cyclone B in the person of Bruno Tesch and others. He was a source of information, and before he died, he bequeathed his entire research library to me. Dr. Lindsay is a man who could simplify and put into layman's language very complicated scientific issues. And I urge you to pay careful attention to what those two people have to say, because it will have an impact on you. It might even change your mind, and you might come to the same conclusion that I did, that the Holocaust was a tragedy to many people. Even if it was only one person mistreated in one German concentration camp, it's a Holocaust to that person. But it was not the mass murder of 6 million Jews by means of the compound Cyclone B. The Germans are not guilty of attempted genocide. That much we know today. I'm Ernst Zündel with another Voice of Freedom broadcast.
I'm Ernst Zündel. I'm president of Samizdat Publishers in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. I'm very privileged to be in our studio today with Dr. William Lindsay, a chemist and expert in the properties of Cyclone B, the agent used allegedly to gas millions of people in World War II. He was an expert witness for me in my court case in Toronto. I'm taking this opportunity between court sessions to ask him specifically about the qualities of this compound Cyclone B. Dr. Lindsay, thank you for joining us. Let me ask you, what is Cyclone B, this supposed murder weapon?
Cyclone B is a material that's been known since the early 1920s. What it consists of, first of all, it is a commercial product. It was used quite widely, not only in Europe, but also in this country, for fumigating ships, flour mills, grain elevators, and things of that sort. What it consists of is about approximately 1/3 hydrocyanic acid, hydrogen cyanide, and the hydrogen cyanide contains what is known as a warning agent, which is nothing more really than a lacrimator to warn you of the existence of hydrogen cyanide, and then it has an acidic stabilizer so that the hydrogen cyanide will not polymerize, which it has a tendency to do when it becomes basic. So what you do is you then have this mixture of 1/3 hydrogen cyanide with the other additives, and then 2/3 of its weight roughly is nothing more than an inert filler that absorbs the hydrogen cyanide so that you do not have this liquid to fool around with. People don't like to work with liquids. They'd much rather stroll along some solid material which can be swept up later on after the hydrogen cyanide is evaporated. Now this inert filler is basically, it could be a number of things. It could be scrap cellulose that has been shredded. It could be kieselguhr or diatomaceous earth, fuller's earth, or anything that had a large absorbing capacity. The consistency and the appearance of this material varied quite extensively, although the hydrogen cyanide content of a standard can did not.
So the product is not really an unknown product. It was known to industry all over the world?
That's quite right.
And to government?
Well, that's right. As a matter of fact, the United States government and its public health service published a number of accounts in which they used Cyclone B that they had purchased in Germany for fumigating ships to get rid of rats, mice, and anything else that might be in there.
So it was not anything diabolically, typically German?
No, as a matter of fact, the first suggestions for using hydrogen cyanide were made by a man by the name of Bell in the United States back in the 19th century. I think it was around 1870 or 80, somewhere in there.
So if I as a layman can capsulize this, what we have here is a perfectly legitimate product
Oh,
with a
yes,
perfectly
yeah.
legitimate use in public health
True.
administration. It has been used by many countries in
Yes.
many armies in exactly the way the Germans used it.
Well, the only difference here is that the Germans saw that it could be used effectively in killing insects, rodents, and that sort of thing, and they got busy after World War I, and with Dr. Tesch's ability as a chemist, and we don't want to forget Dr. Gerhard Peters, who worked with the Dagesh. Both these men, although they might not get along together sometimes over patent difficulties, they were nevertheless the leaders in the development of hydrogen cyanide.
And all this was done above board, and the public
Oh,
knew all
yes,
about this,
yes.
the governments
As
knew all
a matter
about
of
this.
fact, patents were issued. There's no problem whatsoever. As a
Right.
matter of fact, there's an American company that got German patents on Cyclone B. Their innovation was that the hydrogen cyanide was put onto paper discs, and they could spread these cyclone discoids around, and they did a very good job. They even published a manual for the fumigation of military barracks and mess halls.
In America.
Yes.
Okay, Dr. Lindsay, you said on the witness stand, under oath, in Toronto, Canada, that you felt that no one, not a single individual, was killed deliberately with a master plan in Germany using the compound Cyclone B to do it. Is that what you are
Oh,
saying?
yes, I'm thoroughly convinced that that's the case. First of all, if anyone had really been interested in doing any group or one person even in, I cannot see that they would have chosen such a common poison as hydrogen cyanide. There are other poisons that are much more deadly. As a matter of fact, the botulinum toxin is the lethal dose there is measured in micrograms, a thousandth of a milligram or a millionth of a gram.
So if the Germans had in effect a planned mass extermination idea, they could have done it much more cleanly, with far less trouble, cheaply, and on a more massive scale?
Well, that's quite true, but of course the most obvious place here would have been to have had people just disappear on the trek back from Auschwitz to Mauthausen or Bergen-Belsen. The German army and the government spent an awful lot of time and trouble to recover these people. And
Move them about, look at them.
Yes.
I mean, you have visited all these various camps, death camps allegedly,
That's
and
right.
non-death camps.
Aber nicht nur für die Insassen gegolten, sondern auch für die ganze Nation im Dritten Reich, wo sie versuchten, autark zu wirtschaften. Ich bin ein Chemiker aus Amerika. Wir stehen jetzt vor dem Eingang.
In other words, what's the difference between Dachau and between Auschwitz?
Well, if you listen to the people who support the Holocaust, the big difference is that Auschwitz was a death camp and Dachau was not. It was just an ordinary concentration camp. But if you remember that shortly after the war, we were certainly assured at Nuremberg that all the German concentration camps were the same. It made no difference whatsoever. And this was sworn to by a number of American investigators. Now, if you go to Dachau and visit it, you find that it's most of the, of course, a large number of the buildings have been torn down now. But if you go to the building that is a combination crematorium and fumigation area, you find basically the same sorts of installations that all basically had to be in all the camps. You had to regularly delouse the prisoners. As a matter of fact, there was a law that took effect in early 1944, as I remember, which required that all the camps, whether they were concentration camps, whether they were work camps for foreign workers, or whether they were Germans who had been brought back from the East, as the German army advanced, or even before that, the Russians and the Germans made agreements whereby Germans would be returned from
Belarusian
Baltic,
places like that.
in that area. And all these camps had to be fumigated, and they had to be fumigated as regularly as was necessary to keep down any possibility of a typhus epidemic.
Do I understand you, in the few moments that are available to us to put it all together, that in effect this propaganda against Germany, both during and after the war, has twisted what was in effect a thorough public health measure, meaning the delousing with a compound called Cyclone B in these elaborate installations, into a crime, making a life-saving measure into a crime, using Cyclone B, a perfectly legitimate, well-known compound, and therefore a method, into the murder weapon? Is that what you're saying?
That's basically the only conclusion I can arrive at. From a fairly early period in the war, the Allies began making claims that the German intent was to destroy the Polish nation. This did not basically make much of an impression on the United States. But as time went on, apparently with the assistance of a number of people, and I could mention, of course, Rabbi Wise here, but certainly Rabbi Wise was not by himself. He was greatly assisted by such men as Franklin D. Roosevelt. As a matter of fact, the War Refugee Board was issued specifically on the orders of Franklin D. Roosevelt. They made this a regular part and a regular part of the diet of the United States every day.
So, Dr. Lindsay, are you saying, in conclusion, because the time has run out, that we are still being troubled by a hangover from World War II?
That, I think, is a very good summation of the whole problem right there.
I thank you for coming to Toronto.
Glad to.
Thank you very much.